Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. I'm going to start the project that I talked about a few weeks ago, and that is building the buildings for the modules. So stick around and we'll be building a Walters Cornerstone background kit to go on the modules. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. So the kit that I'm going to be building is this Walters Cornerstone background kit that fits against the back of the layout. It's not as deep as the regular building is. Now this is the actual Cornerstone full-sized building. And you can see it's twice as wide as the finished background building. So that, that's what this is going to look like, sort of. I'm making some slight changes, so it'll look at least a little different from this one. But this is what it basically looks like, and it builds fairly easily. Now, what I usually do with this is I have a stepwise process. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I take and remove most of the large components from the sprues because I find they're much easier to work with that way. The smaller stuff, however, I will leave attached to the injection molded sprue. And the reason for that is that these smaller things, they're much more difficult to work with once they're separated from the sprue. So I'll use that way. Then what I do is I take the individual components, take them to the deep sink back there in the utility room, and I hit them with some warm soapy water. Get them cleaned off real good. And the reason that I do that is when they make these kits, they use what's called a mold release agent. So they take the molds and they spray them, usually, with either a silicone or a wax compound, and that allows the plastic to readily separate from the mold after the molding process and after the plastic has cooled. So it's able to just pop right out of there, no problem. However, you're left with either a silicone or a wax or some similar type of mold release agent coating your finished product here. So the first thing you need to do is get some good warm soapy water and clean this off real well. Wash it off real well with clean water, and then I always spray it with distilled water. And the reason for that is a lot of the water that comes out of people's wells, and if it's a public utility, it's probably going to have some dissolved solids in it as well, and you can end up with calcium deposits on the surface after it dries. So I get a gallon bottle of distilled water from the grocery store or the pharmacy, and then I just spray it over here, and that removes that water from the sink that I've used to do the first rinse, and removes all of those dissolved solids that are in your tap water so that you won't get that residue on here. And if you ever do any painting, spray painting, and you get a little, what's called a fisheye, which is like a little round circle in your paint, it's because you've got some sort of contaminant that was left on the surface of the plastic when it came out of the mold, or left over from your tap water that you cleaned the surface with. So be aware of that. Always wash it first, rinse it thoroughly with tap water, and then finally rinse it with some distilled water. And make sure it's distilled water and not some other type of spring water or something like that, because that can still leave residue. Generally, this is a brick building, so I'm going to be painting it a basic brick color. However, the lower portion here is a poured concrete foundation. So this requires 3 steps in the painting process. So once this is dried, I'm going to take it outside, and I'm going to spray the back side of all of the major components of the building jet black. And the reason for that is if at some time I decide to add lights to the interior of the building, that black is going to prevent what I call hot spots. And that's where you can actually see light coming through the plastic itself. And sometimes the paint on the outside will cover that up. But if you do black on the inside first, you guarantee it's not going to happen. Plus, when you look through the windows, if you have a black interior, you're not going to see anything in there. So it helps to hide the fact that you've got an empty building there. So that's the first thing, paint it black on the inside. And I like to use a flat black so that I don't get any reflections. Then, because this section down here on the bottom of the foundation is cement, I'm going to spray that with a cement color paint. And then, once that is dry, then I will cover it with masking tape, and then I'll come on with my brick red paints. So for my cement color, I'm going to use this Krylon Matte Sand Dollar, because I think it makes a very good match for cement. Then, when it comes to my brick, I have several different colors that I use. So you can see this one over here has sort of an orange color. This is a nice brick red color. And this one has sort of a maroon touch to it. So I'll use all three of these so that you don't end up with a uniform look. Because if you look at most buildings out there in the real world, they are not all one color of brick. There'll be various other colors. Because a building out there in the sunlight, it's going to get various amounts of sunlight due to clouds and other shading effects, and the colors are going to look different accordingly. And also, due to weathering effects, the colors are going to be just a bit different. And, you end up with just a lot of dust and dirt being knocked up in an area around an industrial building as a result of the locomotives coming through and trucks and all sorts of things like that. So it's good to have a good mixture of paints. I just happen to I used three of these. And this one here is a Rust-Oleum, and it is claret wine. And this one here is another Rust-Oleum, satin, colonial red. These are all satin colors. And this one here is an Ace paint, and it is a red oxide primer. So that'll just give you some idea of the types of, or different colors that you can work with. Okay, so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these over and I am going to give them their first scrub with the warm soapy water and follow that with a tap water rinse, followed by a distilled water rinse to get everything good and clean. And then after that, once this dries, after a few hours, then I will spray on the black paint on the backside, let that dry overnight, then I will come back and I will apply my cement, let that dry overnight, and then I will do the application of the various brick colors. So this is going to be a several days process just to get to the point where it's painted. And then I'll start moving on to putting these kits together. And that brings me to another point, and that is when you cut these from their sprues, make sure that wherever the sprue contacts were, go back over that with either an X-Acto knife and trim it down flush, or just hit it with a little bit of fine sandpaper so that you get a nice clean edge and you're not going to be messing up your paint by doing it afterwards. So that's just a tip to get you started. Always take care of the sprue contacts and cuts before you do your painting. Now, of course, with a few of these small parts, I'm going to have to deal with it separately. I'm going to go ahead and get started with washing all of this stuff and then onto the painting. So it's now been a couple of days since I shot that introductory footage for you. And as you can see, I've got the painting done. Now let me point out a couple. You can use your plain old blue painter's tape to do your masking like I did here. But what I like to use is this frog tape. And this is a really nice masking tape specifically for painting. And it's got what they call paint block technology. And it gives you a very good seal on the edge of the tape so you don't get any bleed under, okay? So I've got a very good sharp line here, demarcation between the cement and the brick red, as you can see here. So that's just a tip. This stuff works great. You can pick this up at most of your hardware stores in the painting section. As you can see, everything is painted now. I got the back sides of the interiors of the buildings done, painted nice and black, so I'm not going to have any light bleed through. Now at this point, the building is ready to start being put together. And the first thing that I need to do then is, I have this sprue here of green window inserts and door inserts and various other pieces. And I'm going to leave these green because in the previous version of the model, I painted some of this stuff gray, I believe. And so I'm going to leave these green in order to make it look a little bit more different from the full-size building. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be gluing these various window inserts and door inserts into place on the building. And you do that before you put it together. And the reason you want to do that is because this building is going to be fairly narrow. And even though it is going to be open on the back side, it is a lot easier to put these various window and door inserts in place with it laying down, let me tell you. I'm going to go ahead also and put a styrene sheet back on this building, because if I do put lights in this, you got to be able to seal it up, and you don't want light leaking out onto the backdrop. So I'm going to go ahead and start with that, but I've got to wait for those to finish drying. They've been washed and are ready to go, and then I've got to cut them all loose from the sprues. So at this point, I'm just going to wrap this part 1 of the video up on building the Cornerstone kit. And in the next process, we'll start putting all of the components together. We'll build the building, and then hopefully, if it doesn't take too long, we'll be able to wrap it up in part 2. So that's a wrap for today's video. Have a great week, and I'll see you here on Friday with part 2 of this video series. Bye now.